Welcome to the third episode of Life, the Universe, and Everything. I'm Dr. Tanya Grantham. In this episode, I wanted to start to tackle something that is really very serious and very relevant, and that is that the veterinary profession is in trouble. One of the things that is occurring is that veterinary graduates are leaving the profession at a very, very high rate. Yes, we have a high suicide rate, which I will move into during the course of today's episode. But many vets are leaving the profession to go to other professions, to discover that what they really thought they wanted to do, they don't want to be in the situation where they find themselves. And one of the contributing factors to that is a high level of burnout and a very high level of compassion fatigue. Today's episode is an introduction into burnout and compassion fatigue. So if you feel like you really need some assistance, then please reach out, because the only way we are able to overcome these feelings and these situations is to start to share them. Let's look at some statistics. In the United States of America, veterinary burnout or burnout in veterinarians costs the industry more than $1 billion per annum. If we include veterinary technicians, in South Africa, these are the professionals that we refer to as veterinary nurses, then it costs the industry even more. And burnout is increasing across all medical professions. A topic that frequently is raised is the suicide rate among veterinarians. I'm aware of it because I'm a vet. The statistics that I could gather are based on numbers in the United States of America. The most recent survey that was performed and published in the middle of 2022. So fairly recent. And if we compare the suicide rates in the United States of veterinarians versus the general public, then gender plays a very big role in the frequency or the number of suicides that occur. Male vets are 1.6 times more likely to commit suicide. Female vets, 2.4 times higher than the general public. If we look at veterinary technicians, and remember I said in South Africa, those are the professionals that we call veterinary nurses. Male veterinary technicians, 5 times higher suicide rate, and female veterinary technicians, 2.3 times higher. So whether you are a female vet or a female veterinary technician, your numbers are pretty much the same. If we compare veterinarian suicide rates to those of physicians and dentists, then the veterinary rate is 2 times higher than those other medical professionals. And we have the highest suicide rate of all professions. Looking at the Center for Disease Control, again in the United States, 1 out of 6 veterinarians will consider suicide. 1 out of 6 veterinarians will consider suicide. That is extraordinarily high. The other disturbing factor about suicide in veterinarians is that vets have fewer unsuccessful suicide attempts. In other words, we know what we're doing and we know what we want and we don't make a mistake. It's a shocking statistic. So let's have a look at what is meant by the term burnout and what is meant by the term compassion fatigue, and how do they differ, where do we find them, and what are the causes of these two conditions that appear to be so prevalent within the veterinary profession. Burnout is defined as physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion brought about by chronic stress. And chronic stress usually in the workplace. Burnout is accompanied by feelings of disillusionment and high negativity, and often increased cynicism around your situation and often around your profession. Burnout stems from where a person works. That means that, in actual fact, anybody can suffer from burnout. On the other hand, compassion fatigue, it can be seen as a type of burnout, and it is created by the trauma of helping others in distress. So when we are constantly exposed to another person's emotional distress, then we can start to move into compassion fatigue. And once we move into that fatigue, we end up having a very, very decreased capacity for empathy. So we no longer appreciate, or we are no longer able to empathize, find within us the emotional capacity to deal with the other person's emotional distress. Along with that, the person that is suffering from compassion fatigue very often develops a complete disregard for their personal safety. And compassion fatigue, as opposed to burnout, compassion fatigue is brought on by the type of work that a person does. So if you look at what I've just said, compassion fatigue is very common in all of the professions where there is a caring component. So we see compassion fatigue not only in the veterinary fraternity, but also medical, nurses, occupational therapists, psychologists, all of the people that are tasked with looking after another's physical, mental, and emotional well-being. And then we look at depression. Depression very often coexists with these other two conditions, and suicidal thoughts are commonplace. I'm setting the scene for the severity of this problem within the veterinary profession. So some of the contributing factors to burnout are excessive workloads. One of my biggest issues with the veterinary profession, as I know it in South Africa, so I know the small animal aspect of the veterinary profession. I worked in it myself, and I have burnt out. I have had chronic fatigue. I have had some very serious physical ailments. My argument should be that if we find ourselves within those professions, our expected working hours per week should be less, so that we are able to find some sort of relief, and we can learn to establish some sort of work-life balance. Excessive workloads. So now I only spoke about hours. I didn't even speak about what is expected of you within a small animal practice. One of the other contributing factors to chronic stress is an imbalance between the job demands and the skills. As a new graduate, you have book knowledge and you have a little bit of practical skill, but you don't have experience and expertise. In many instances, vets have a lack of autonomy. In other words, we work for an employer, and there are rules that we have to follow, and we're not able to make decisions that are in alignment with our own judgments and with our own moral codes. And then the last factor, I mean, it combines all of them in terms of prolonged work stress. I do want to reiterate that burnout, everyone is susceptible to burnout at some level. So as we move through this video, I hope that a lot of what I'm going to share with you, if you're not in the veterinary profession, you are at least able to take some gems and apply them to your own life. Let's have a look at who's at risk within the veterinary industry. We've already seen from the American statistics that veterinary technicians are at a higher risk, it would seem, than veterinarians. There are a few other categories that are also at high risk. At the top of that list are recent graduates. If there is an imbalance between the level of skills and the tasks that the vets are being asked to perform, I would say that as a new graduate, you fall slap bang into that category. Into that area of not yet having expertise. And if you don't have a mentor and you're in the deep end, that creates a great deal of stress. Add to that, many recent graduates have very, very high educational debt. I don't even want to say any more about that. It's an extremely expensive degree because there is such a high proportion of practical skills and application that we have to accumulate during a very lengthy degree. The statistics also found that small animal practitioners were at higher risk. Women, very high risk. And then anyone who works as an associate within a private practice versus an owner of the private practice has a greater chance of burning out than the practice owner. And burnout occurs less frequently in relief veterinarians or locum vets and vets that are in the public arena or public practice. So those will be vets in academic institutions, vets that work for the government, etc. Moving away from the doom and gloom, big sigh. I'm going to now introduce a number of concepts that are important to talk about as we move into how do we address burnout and compassion fatigue. So the first concept I want to mention is self-esteem. What is self-esteem? Self-esteem has to do with how we perceive ourselves in comparison to the outer world. These are, I have researched them, but these are the ways in which I have processed these concepts that bring me to a way of working with them. Let's look at self-esteem. Nobody wants to be average, least of all veterinarians. Well, nobody. If we are unable to perform a task, or if our classmates are able to finish a sterilization in less time than we can, what is the internal dialogue? How does that make you feel? Does that impact your self-esteem? Of course it does. So we need to be considerate of where are our levels of self-esteem. And as we gain skills and as we are able to apply our knowledge and as our expertise increases, then our self-esteem also increases. The next concept for me that is important is self-worth. I don't think that self-esteem and self-worth are the same. Self-worth for me is an inner belief in myself. It's how do I feel about myself and how do I value myself? How much do I believe I am worthy of love and I'm worthy of respect and I'm worthy of even the physical the material objects in my life that make my life easy and comfortable. The next concept to introduce is self-love. What is self-love? There are many aspects to self-love, and I'll end off this video with a very nice wheel that looks at the elements of self-love. But essentially, self-love is having a very high regard for your own well-being and your happiness. Nobody else is responsible for your happiness except yourself, except you. The more you love yourself, the more likely it is that you will be happy. And finally, self-compassion. And this is where, as veterinary professionals, many of our interactions are interactions of compassion for other beings that enter into our professional arena. I can openly own the fact that I have a great deal of compassion for my animal patients. As I have matured, I have also developed a great deal of compassion for my human clients, and I see that they require our services as much as the animal companion does. So when I think about how do I exercise compassion, then self-compassion is, can I turn that kindness and that empathy inward? Can I be a friend to myself? Can I love myself? And can I drop the inner critic and become less harsh? In closing, I want to mention a few more aspects of self-love that I hope you will consider, and I will be exploring them in more detail as we move through this video series. The most obvious aspect of self-love for me was self-care. How do I look after myself? What do I eat? Do I do any physical exercise? Do I go to the hairdresser, and do I have my nails done? The next aspect that is relatively easy for me to look at is my mental health and my self-discovery. So am I setting aside enough time to engage in other mental activities that are not only related to my profession? What are my hobbies? Whom am I sharing my time with? And am I learning skills that help me to develop resilience and improve the way in which I am able to react and behave and interact within my workspace? One of the more, or two of the more difficult aspects, in fact, three of the very difficult aspects that are present in my life. Number one, boundaries. It has been extremely difficult for me to set boundaries. And I frequently see my colleagues spending longer and longer hours at work, saying to themselves that there's a demand and the animals need them and the people need them. And in one sense, it's true. But if you don't take time to fill up your cup and you get sick and you collapse, who's going to be there for them? Because you won't be anymore. So boundaries has been and still is a challenge for me. A very, very big challenge for me is self-acceptance. I have looked and continue to investigate my inner voice. That's the third aspect. The way in which I speak to myself, the stories I tell myself, the belief systems that I've taken on, many of them formulated or created by my ego because my ego felt a need to protect me. And it's much, much deeper than that. But those elements are improving, increasing. I'm learning new things, gaining new skills, finding that I am wanting to be a lot kinder to myself. And in so doing, I am experiencing much less stress than I have done before. This brings me to the end of today's episode. I do hope that it has been insightful and food for thought. Thank you so much for choosing to spend this time with me. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode and sharing some more of my thoughts and my experiences. And in closing, so much love to you.